Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is Bava Kamma daf chet. We are on Zion Mabet, third wide line at the two dots. I'm going to share my screen. Yes, we're going to have we're continuing the discussion of Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva. So what did they discuss yesterday? So they talked about what does it mean to have to pay from the best of your materials. Okay. So if I say to you that if you owe somebody something and you have to pay from the best of your land, does it mean that we look at your land and say whatever's the best of your land you have to pay? Or three possibilities. Or do we look and say, oh, you know what? Don't look at your land in particular. Let's look at land in general. Do we pay? Is it what we do is we look and say, if you're gonna pay from the best, you have to pay what the world calls the best. And so as long as you have something, maybe it's the worst of your land, but if the world calls it the best, that's going to be sufficient. Or do we say, no, you don't look at either the damager or the world, you look at the damaged party himself and see what land does that person have and what's their best land, and that's how we measure it. So those are three different methods of measuring. And the way we've understood Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva up to this point is Rabbi Yishmael says that we focused on the victim, Victor the victim, that's what we call him. And then Rabbi Akiva says, no, we focus on Don the damager. Don the damager is the one who we look at, and that Don has to pay his best property, okay? Even if it's better than anything owned by the damaged party. So that's the situation where Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva would argue. Rabbi Yishmael would say that if you have property, if Don the damager has property that is equal to the best of Victor the victim and has property that's even better than that, he can get away with giving the property that is the less good property because it's equal to the best property of Victor the victim. But Rabbi Akiva says, no, you have to pay the best property of Don the damager. So that's where we were. Now, the question is there a possibility of saying that best and worst is an objective statement based on the world at large rather than something that's subjective based on this particular person? Now, maybe that's not quite the right definition of subjective and objective, but in any event, that's where we are, and that's what we're going to be jumping into right now. So, Baimine, at the two dots, last word on the third wide line of Zion Mabet. Baimine Rav Shmuel bar Abba ma'akronya Rabbi Abba. So Rabbi Shmuel asked Rabbi Abba, Kishahain Shaman, when they determine the value of the land, Bishalo Hain Shaman, do you focus on the other properties owned by this particular person? O Bishal Olam Hain Shaman, or do they focus on what it means in terms of the world at large? So Aliba de Rabbi Yishmael lo tibailach. Now, when it comes to Rabbi Yishmael, the answer to that is clear because Rabbi Yishmael used the language of the Amr B'Denizak Shaimin, that it's clear that we focus on the damaged party. And Tosos here, last Tosos Zion Mabet, helps us out. So take a look. Aliba de Rabbi Yishmael lo tibailach de Amr B'Denizak Shaimin, Kaven de Yelef Migzera Shava. He learns from a Gzera Shava that specifically says the Sadeh that learns from two references to Sadeh in the same pasuk. Ubi'er besadeh acher, that where a fire burns another field, it's clear that in that reference to a burned field, that is talking about a field that belongs to the damaged party. And therefore, when we then talk about paying from the best, we're talking about paying from the best based on the damaged party, based on the victim. And so we focus on Victor the victim. So Aval Rabbi Akiva, Evsher Dahad Ka'amar Dehechtem Kashalem, Lo Asa Elamute Denizak. That when it may be that when Rabbi Akiva says that we focus on paying from Don the damager, that the reason that we say that is not because we're actually going to look at Don the damager's best property and take it away from him, but rather we're going to look at the property of the world and say what's the best property. And it's an objective standard of what's considered best. And therefore, and all he's trying to say when he says that we follow the damager is in order to tell us that we don't actually look at the property within the property of the victim. And so Ella, so Kiti Bailach, as we pick back up in the Gemara, Kiti Bailach, it's 1, 2, 3, 6 lines down, second word on the line in the wide lines on Zion Amabet. So Kiti Bailach aliba de Rabbi Akiva de Amar de Benazik Shaminan. That when we say that we're asking this question about whether we look at some objective standard that focuses on the world's best, as opposed to a subjective focus standard that focuses on Dawn's own property, Dawn the damager's own property, what's the halakha? So Meitev Sadehu Amar Rachmana L'Me'ute de Nizik Odilma L'Me'ute de Almanami. Is Meitav Sadeh, the best of his field, telling us that we just don't focus on the damaged parties, on the victim's field, and instead we focus on the world at large? Or do we say, no, we not only do we not focus on the victim's field, but we won't even focus on the world at large, and we're only going to focus on Dawn the damager's field? So that's the question. So Amar Le Rachmana. Amar Le. So Rabbi Shmuel Bar Abba. Rabbi Abba replies to Rabbi Shmuel Bar Abba, and he says, Rachmana Amar Meitav Sadehu. The Torah tells us the best of his field, So the emphasis is on his. And you're going to tell me that really it means the rest of the world? Of course not. It's got to be his own field. So Rabbi Abba has now answered the question, and although he answered with the question, his answer is we are looking at the fields of Dawn the Damager alone and not the rest of the world. So now we ask a question. Esvei, 1 second, maybe we could say that the following brisa disagrees with you, because ainly Ella Idis, if the person, now we're going to go through a long brisa here as a preview, and there's one line in this brisa that's going to be key. So we're going to come back and re-quote that line, but we'll go through the entire brisa first. So if all of your property, kulam, if the person only's got the best property, only superior property, kulam govamina idis. How much property? So we've been using the following numbers. We've been using $100 for a square foot for the best property, $50 a square foot for the medium property, and we'll call it $10 a square foot for the lowest quality property. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. So ainly Ella it is. So that shows that the person only's got the best property. Kulam government is. Well, then whether or not the claimant is a remember that we have 3 different categories of claimants. We have somebody who's been damaged. We have somebody who is a lender, and we have somebody who is a wife trying to collect her ketubah. Those are the 3 different categories. And ordinarily, the damaged victim collects from the best, the lender collects from the middle, and the woman collecting her ketubah collects from the worst, from the inferior. So that's the general rule. But now if the person only's got the best, well, then all of it gets collected from that best property. So Baininus, if all the person has is medium average land, so kulam government Baininus, everybody takes the Baininus. Ziburis, if all that people have is the inferior land, again, kulam government Ziburis. It's not a difficult question because that's all the person's got. If that's all you've got, then that's all you can get. So hayulo idis ubeininis ubiziburis. Now we're going to go to the other case where if you have all 3 kinds of lands, so nizakim beidis, then again, as we said, the person who's damaged takes the best. Balcho beinis, the middle guy, the lender takes the average. Uksubas isha beziburis, and a woman's ksuba gets the least good fields. So idis ubeininis nizakim. Now what about if the person only has the best and the average? Well, nizakim beidis, the one who got damaged gets the best. Balchov ksubas isha bebeininis. Again, the woman can't collect nothing, so she's going to get. Please don't play with the bag. It's not. The woman's not going to get nothing, so she's going to get what exists. And the worst thing that exists for this person is the average land. What if they've got Baininus Uziburis? They got the average and the worst. So Nizakin Uval Chov Bebaininus. Then the middle, then the damaged victim and the lender, they both collect from the average land. Uksu Basisha Biziburis. And the woman is going to get from the least good land. And now we turn to Chet Amud Aleph, and we say, Idis Viziburus. How about when if you have the best and the worst? Well, then Nizakin Be'idis. The best is for, the damaged person gets the best. Again, that's what he's supposed to get. Uvalchov Ksubas Isha Biziburus. That the lender and the Ksuba, they get the worst. Now, the question that Rashi wants to answer is, I don't understand. If the lender is supposed to get the medium and there is no medium, shouldn't we move the lender up and allow the lender to get the best? So Rashi is going to explain that. Because if we take a look at the top Rashi on Chet Amud Aleph, it is the Ziboris Nizakim, it is Uvalcho Uksuva Isha Beziboris, that the woman, the damage victim gets the best, but the lender and the one collecting from a ketubah, they get the worst. So midoraisa balcho bezibur. So Rashi explains that why is it that the lender gets the worst? It's because really from the Torah they're supposed to get the worst. Kamma, as we will see shortly. The Rabbanan who tikkun. It's the rabbis who made a takanim. They made a decree. The tikkun lay the benus. They are the ones who said that we're going to allow him to collect from the average. Why do we want him to collect from the average? Because we don't want to close the door from borrowers. If we create too harsh a regime that it makes it too difficult for lenders to collect their money, then they will not lend in the first place.
Well, if they don't have the money.
Well, if they don't have the money, then of course they can't lend. But if the point is that if a potential lender has money and a poor person asks to borrow, a lender should be nice and lend the money. That's that because we're all part of one family. Well, if the borrower doesn't have the average property kind of property, well, then there's nothing to be done about it. And therefore, there won't be a takana. And as a result, the lender will have to be stuck with the worst. So that explains why, even though you might have thought that the lender should get boosted up to be able to take the idis, we say, no, we're not going to let him take the idis. We're going to make him take the ziburis. We're going to make him take the worst. Okay, so now that we said all of that, we went through the entire brisa. But what was the key case? Katani mia mitzia. We learned somewhere there in the middle. Baininus viziburis. If you have a middle average field and a worst field, nizakin ubalchov bevenus. The balchov and the damaged party both get from the average field. Uksubas isha biziburus, and the woman gets the least, the worst field, the inferior field. Now, now, if you tell me that we're focused on the property only of the damaged and we don't look at the world at large, well then, tasa baininus shalo keidis. Shouldn't the person's average field now be treated as if it was the best field? Yes, we should, because if in fact we're saying that it's totally subjective and that the determination of what is a person's best is based on what they own, well, then this person's average is now their best. So and now if they only have two fields, the best field ends up going only to the damager, to the damaged party, and the worst field now gets split between the ketubah and the ketubah and the lender. And so doesn't that show that it must be that we're focused on objective standards of superior, average, and inferior? No, it does not in fact mean that. So that's the question that the Gemara asks, and we answer in the negative, because we can actually say, this is what we're talking about. That we're talking about a situation where the person who did damage had best fields and he sold them. And so as a result, because he sold them, and now is only left with average and below average fields. So that is why we're going to call them average and below average. And the point is that when the lender made the loan, he thought he was going to be able to collect from this average field because he knew that the borrower had superior fields, average fields, and inferior fields. And he knew that he was entitled to collect from the average field. And so as a result, we are not in that circumstance going to demote the lender because when the loan was made, he was supposed to collect from this field. And indeed, Rav Chisda made this same kind of point. Now, and Hachinami Mistabra. Now, maybe we can say that this actually helps us understand a contradiction of this brisa with another brisa, because we have another brisa that says Midikatani Achrisi. We got another brisa that says Beinanis Viziburis. Again, what did we say in the most recent brisa? We said middle and low. The damaged party gets the middle, and the lender gets the middle. And the woman collecting her ketubah, she's the only one who gets the lowest. But what do we say here? Beinanis Viziburis, Nizakin Beveinanis. The damaged party gets the best. The Beinanis, the average. Ubalchov, Uksuvas Isha, Viziburis. And now the lender and the woman collecting her ketubah are getting the inferior land. So Kashina Adadi. These two brises seem to contradict one another, because in one place we said that the lender gets the average, and in the other place we're saying the lender gets the inferior. So why is that? And so Ella Lav Shmamina, don't we say, like we just said here, Kan Shahaisalo Idisu Machara, that in our brisa, in the first brisa that we quote, we're talking about a situation where the person who's having to pay the debt, the debtor, that person had the great field, had the superior field, and then sold it. And so as a result, both the damaged party and the lender are able to collect from the average. And in the second brisa, we're dealing with a situation where the person never had the superior field, and therefore the lender never had the expectation of being able to collect from this field, because it was always the best field that the payer owned. And so as a result, he would have expected to have to collect from the inferior field. So that is our proposal number one. But in fact, we do not need to say that, because there's another answer that we can give to explain the inconsistency between the two brises. The biasema, because you can actually say the following. Actually, in both cases, we're talking about a situation where the person did not have superior land and sold it. So below kasha, and yet there's no difficulty between the two situations. In one situation, we're talking about where his average field is equal to the best fields of the world. And in the other, meaning maybe we can answer that in fact we do focus to some degree on what is meant by the best in the world. And what we're saying is that the best in the world is, meaning that this is in fact that our first brisa does support the idea that we're looking at objective standards. And the point is that in that situation, it's a truly average field, and that's why the lender gets to collect from it. Whereas, in the second situation, even though it's an average, he calls it an average field, it's actually equal to the superior land of the entire world. And so as a result, that is why only the damaged party gets to collect from it and not everybody else. Okay, the e-biasema. Well, in second, that would suggest that we would have definitively proven the opposite, that everything is based on world valuation, but we don't have to say that either, because if you want, we can say Edi kagon shahaisa baininus shaloka baininus dalma. Really, everything is like an average of the world. And here's what the difference is between those two brises. Mar savar b'shalo hein shamin. One is saying that you focus on the person himself, and as a result, it now becomes the best, and that's why, in fact, in the second brisa, we say that the damaged party is the only one who gets the average field, because you focus on that person. And the other person says, no, you focus on the entire world. Ravina Amr, and Ravina says there's another answer that we can give to this inconsistency. They're actually arguing with respect to something that Ula said. Amr Ula, Devar Torah Balcho Biziburus, that really, according to the Torah, a lender is supposed to get from the inferior land. This is what Rashi quoted earlier. Shenemar b'chutz tamod va'isha sher ata noshebo yotzi elecha es ha'avod hachutza. That you need to stand outside. You're not allowed to. If you're going to somebody's house to collect a debt from them, you're not allowed to go inside to get your collateral and to collect the debt, because you're not allowed to come in and say, hey, I want that, I want that. That's just, we don't allow people to do that. That's not a nice thing. So ma darko shel adam lahotzi lachutz pachas shebekul kalim. What does people take out in order to satisfy their debtors, their creditors, excuse me? They take out the worst of the utensils. So, and therefore, we're going to assume that they'll also take out the worst of their property, because Tosfos points out that, hey, well, it's not going to be, it's going to be a little bit bigger property because it's not worth a lot. But we'll see. It depends on how big the debt is. The bigger the debt, the bigger the property. But the bottom line is that Tosfos notes here, hey, I thought that if you pay with movable objects, it doesn't make a difference what it is, because you can always, it's always considered the best. But the point is that Tosfos highlights that, in fact, we can say that the idea is common, that basically once we say that you're going to give the worst in terms of utensils, we assume you're going to also give the worst in terms of land. So why, again, Ula is telling us this teaching, why does the world allow a lender to collect from the average land? Because we don't want to close out people from borrowing. So now that we understand that, actually, we can have a new explanation of the two different brises. According to the first brisa, Mar Isle Takanta de Ula. The first brisa has the Takana of Ula, and that is why not only does the damaged party get to collect from the average field, but also the borrower gets to collect from the average field, because the borrowers, because that is the enactment that we have. And I know there are a lot of people that we're talking about, so it can get confusing. Umar leisle takantadula. Whereas in the second brisa, we said that the lender has to collect from the worst field because he disagrees with Ula. He does not say that there was a takana of the rabbis to protect lenders, and so as a result, that's why he would allow that. So now that we have gone through that detail, so now the Gemara is going to expand the situation and add a further complication. So what happens if a debtor sells his property? So let's take a look and we'll see. So Tan Rabbanan, Machar la'echad. If, again, so we're talking about Don the Damager. Don the Damager, and again, in all of these cases, we're talking about Don the Damager. It has had a lot of bad luck, because not only has something that they own damaged somebody else, so they owe somebody damages, but they are also a borrower, so they have to pay back a lender, and they are also in the process of getting divorced, so they have to pay a ketuvah. So all three of those things are going to be owned by Don the Damager. And now, what happens if it's all his property is sold to one person, or to three people at one time? Well, then all of them are effectively like the original owner. And what that means is that whoever is holding the best is going to pay off the damaged party. Whoever's holding the average is going to pay off the lender, and whoever's holding the inferior is going to pay off the woman's ketubah. Okay, but if they were to do it at one after the other, when it comes to the three people, so kulan govim mina akron, all of them get to collect from the last of them. Meaning the last buyer is stuck having to pay everybody. So ain low. Now, if that last buyer doesn't have sufficient property to pay everybody, gova mishilafanav, then the people who are owed money get to collect the prior buyer. Ain low, and if that person still doesn't have enough to pay everybody off, gova mishilafnei lefanav. You have to pay the third to last buyer. Right, so you pay the last buyer, the second to last buyer, and the third to last buyer, and keep going on, meaning as many buyers as you would have had. That's how many you collect from until you collect all the debt. So now, we said at the very beginning of this brisa that if you sold all the property to one person, you would have to everybody gets to collect from the property that they're entitled to. So the lender collects from the average, the damage collects from the best, and the woman collecting her ketubah collects from the worst. So if you were to tell me that they were all bought at the same time, hashta l'shlosha. Well, what's the difference between that case and the case of the three? After all, when you had three people buying all at one time, you might have been able to say, well, really, this guy bought them before this one, and this one bought it before this one. And so we should have some sort of ordering. And yet we say that all of them fall under the same category as if they were the original owner, meaning that the best goes to the damage, the middle goes to the lender, and the worst goes to the woman collecting the ketubah. So why do you need to even teach me the idea of one buyer? It must be that we're talking about a situation where the single buyer bought the different properties on different days. Umayshna shlosha. And what's now in that case? Why is the rule for three different buyers different? And what's the reason? Because the kol chad v'chad amar, like the reason is that if you have three buyers on three separate days, that we are going to focus just on the last buyer, because each of the prior buyers can say to a creditor, when I bought my property from Don the Damager, I left Don the Damager with property. So as a result, you need to go to Don the Damager before you come to me. But
they thought that Don the Damager,
yeah, Don the Damager has had really bad luck. So akol chad v'chad leimale, because and so each of them can say hanachti lecha makom legvot mimenu. Exactly, and each of them will be able to say, I left you something. So that's that's the story. So in that case, what are we talking about? How and essentially, why can't the single buyer say to the same thing? So So here's what we're talking about. Kagon shalachach idis ba'acharona. We're talking about a situation where the buyer bought the good stuff at the end. So since he bought the good stuff at the end, so now he doesn't want them to all collect from the last one. Because if in fact the guy had bought the bad stuff at the end, well, then he could say, listen, you have to collect from the thing I bought last. But here, and again, Rav Sheshes also says that we're talking about a situation where he bought the best stuff last, and that's why he doesn't want them to be able to all collect from the last. Well, why don't we allow them all to collect from the last? Because he can tell them the following: Ishas kisu, if you're quiet, v'shaklisu k'danaichu, and you get what you get, and you don't get upset. Shaklisu. Well, then fine. Take what you're supposed to get. Meaning, if you're a lender, get the average. If you're a woman getting the ksuva, you're supposed to get the inferior. Ve'ilo. But if you don't, here's what I'm going to do. Mahadrina shtara diziburas lemare. I'm going to go return my contract to buy the worst stuff back to Don the Damager. And so what will Don the Damager be left with? Just the worst stuff, and everybody will be stuck taking the worst stuff. V'shaklisu kulchu miziburis, and you'll all have to get the worst. Well, if in fact he could say that, and now we turn to Chedam Abet, v'nizakin nami nemahachi. Why don't we allow him to say this to the damaged party? Meaning even the damaged party who's supposed to get the best, why can't he use this strategy to force the damaged party to get the worst? So that cannot be our explanation.
Who wins that damage?
Well, right now, if in fact Don the Damager were to tell Victor the victim that, listen, if you don't, actually, remember it's the buyer from Don the Damager. So if the buyer were to say to Victor the victim, listen, if you don't take the worst field, I'm going to give the worst field back to Don the Damager, and you're going to be stuck with the worst field. That's a valid claim, it seems. That's exactly what we're allowed to, it seems like we're allowed to say. So, so what we're looking for a situation, again, as a reminder, we're looking for a situation where the buyer has bought the 3 fields on 3 different days, and he wants to be able to somehow force the damaged party to take the best, the lender to take the average, and the woman to take the inferior. That's what he's trying to do. And we haven't yet figured out what case that would result in. So biyasme, we're talking about orphans. Dela b'nei piraninu. Those orphans, they don't have any responsibility to pay their father's debt. So they might have the guy might have bought it when the guy was still living, when Don was living. But now, unfortunately, Don the Damager has passed away. And if, in fact, the property were to somehow be returned, there would be no liability for the orphans. And because there would be no liability for the orphans, so then the buyer would be stuck on the hook, having to pay the father's obligations. So, the Yasbi de la B'nei Piranu, the Shibuda delay ale didei ramya. And the father's debt obligations sit with the buyer. So as a result, he won't be able to say this. Now, I'm not exactly sure why he can't say, well, I'll give back both the best and the middle, but I guess then he gets left with nothing. So that doesn't make, he's not going to end up with anything, and that's maybe not a valid concern, because at the end of the day, he's not going to give up everything and be left with nothing. So Ella, because at the end of the day, he doesn't net any profit from doing that. Ella mishum de amr lahu. So it must be that the buyer can say to them, why is it that we say that that creditors are not able to collect from certain property that is already meshubed, when there is property that is still held by the original debtor? It's because meshum takanta didi. It's because we want to benefit the buyer, right? If I buy property from you, Mark, and you owe somebody money, and I leave you with some additional property, the person that borrowed the money, that lent you the money, should be able to claim from the property that you still have in order to protect me. But now, in this situation where I bought some of your land on one day, and then other land on another day, and other land on a third day, now I'm losing as a result of that original protection that I was getting. And so as a result, that's I don't want that protection. I don't want that protection. So leave me out of it. Kidarava, and it's like Rava said to Amar Rava, Kol HaOmer EFG, but the Kanis Chachamim, Kigonzeh, Kigonzu, Shominlo. That any time that a person says, I don't want to benefit from a rabbinic decree, like this particular case, we listen to them. And my Kagonzu, what is the case that he was referring to? Kid Rav Huna, he's referring to Rav Huna's ruling. To Amar Rav Huna, Yechola Isha Shetomer Labala, that a woman can say to her husband, a wife can say to her husband, Eini Nizonis, the Eini Osa. Listen, I have the right for you to pay me my food. You have to feed me, but I thereby have to give you all of my earnings. But you know what? I'd prefer to hold on to my earnings, so I'm not going to benefit from the decree that the rabbis made for me. I'd rather just support myself because I'm a high paid woman. I'd rather just support myself. And so therefore, similar to that situation, we're going to say in this situation that the person who bought the property can say, I don't want to benefit from that feature. Okay, so now that we've got that explanation, so now we're ready for the next case. We're ready for a further complication because it's not complicated enough. So let's add a second layer of buyers. So we have the situation with one buyer. Now we're going to, or multiple buyers, but they all bought from the Don the Damager. Now we're going to have a second generation of buyers. So let's take a look. So Pshita, it's obvious. Machar lokeach beinanis v'ziburis. If the buyer number one sells the average and the inferior field to a buyer number two, the shiyer idis lefanav, and all he's left with is the best field. And Rashi tells us very importantly here, we're talking about a situation where he bought that best field last when he bought it from Don the Damager. Leisukulu v'ligbe v'ligvu mi'idis. Everybody gets to collect from him and gets to collect from the best because daha achronahi. The buyer's losing out big time in this case. So daha achronahi, because this piece of property was the last property bought from Don the Damager, and so as a result, it's the property that everybody gets to go to first. And the buyer number one no longer holds. The buyer generation number one no longer holds the average and the inferior. That he can tell them, listen, why don't you just collect from my average and inferior field? Because I don't want to benefit from that decree that the rabbis made because he sold those. So now the question. So we have that's clear. Aval machar idis. But what happens? Same situation. Buyer number one bought all three properties from Don the Damager, and he bought the best property last. And now he sells that best property to buyer number two. The shier beinanis v'ziburis. And all he's left with is the average property and the inferior property. What's the story? Do we say that because the best property was the last property bought, we're going to allow the damaged party, the lender, and the woman to all go to buyer generation number two and collect from the best field? Or do we say no? So Abaye thought that we should allow all three, the damaged party, the lender, and the woman, all to collect from the best field that was bought by the second generation, by the second buyer. But Amarle Rava said, I don't think so, because of the following. When a buyer, when somebody sells something, they sell 100% of everything that they have with respect to that property. And what was something that buyer number one had with respect to that property? The Kavan de Ilu Asugabi Lokeach Rishon. Matzi Agabi Luhu Mibenas Viziburis, that since when the lender and the woman would come to the first buyer, he would have been able to force them to take the average and the inferior. Even though when the first buyer bought those properties, Akasi Idis B'nei Chorin Havi, there was still the superior field left with Don the Damager. And we have a rule that you're not allowed to collect from encumbered properties, namely in this case the average and the inferior field that was bought by buyer number one, as long as there's property that is unencumbered because it's still held by Don the damager. Matzi Amrulo, who the first buyer can say to the other two people, to the Larry the lender and Wilma the wife, Lo nicha li bahai the takana. I don't benefit from this takana. I don't want to benefit from this takana. Lokeach sheni nami matzilam amar lahu. So too, the second generation buyer, the person who bought the best field from buyer number one, can say the same thing. Gabi Bainin is Viziburis. He can say, listen, go collect from the average and the inferior land. Because when the second buyer bought the land, he bought it with every single right that was associated with it. So as a result, Rava says that in that situation, everybody would continue to collect from the land that they were supposed to, meaning the Victor, the victim, would be able to collect from buyer number two, whereas Larry, the lender, and Wilma, the wife, would still have to collect from buyer number one. And Larry, the lender, would collect the average field, and Wilma, the wife, would collect the lowest quality field, the inferior field. So Amarava. So now a new case. Again, more cases involving consecutive buyers. So Rava says, Reuven shemachar kol sadosav l'Shimon. Now, what happens if we're going to have Reuven is the guy number one? Reuven is our new Don the damager, and he sells everything to Shimon. And he sells one field to Levi. So Uba Balchov to Reuven, and the person who Larry the lender comes now to Reuven and Ratzami Zegova, and he wants to collect from a particular buyer, Ratzami Zegova. He can collect from either Shimon or Levi. The low Amran. So when is that situation that we say that he can collect from Shimon or Levi? Lo Amran ela to Zavan Bainis. We're only talking about where Levi bought an average field. If he bought, again, remember, so right now, Levi, it looks like Levi might lose, but we'll see. Aval Zabin, it is Vizibur. If Levi bought from Shimon, meaning again, Levi's buyer number two, Shimon's buyer number one. If Levi bought from Shimon the best field and the worst field, low, then Reuven's lender is not going to be able to go and collect from Levi, because Levi can say, I purposely bought the best field and the worst field from Shimon because I wanted to leave with Shimon an average field. I wanted to leave with Shimon an average field because I knew lenders might come and want to collect from it. So that's why I purposely didn't buy that field. So I left you a different field, so you can't collect from me. And in fact, we're going to say that Levi's allowed to claim that. You can't use that you can't now try to claim lands that are not supposed to go to you. And even if Levi bought an average field, we still won't allow the lender to collect from Levi. Only as long as Levi left behind some more average field, meaning Shimon bought superior, average, and inferior, and now Levi bought only some of the average field from Shimon. Well, if now the lender comes to Levi and says, I want to collect from you, Levi can say, no, I left some average field with Shimon. You have to go first to Shimon. Shimon is buyer number one. Delo Matzi Amar, because in that situation, if he didn't leave behind, then he wouldn't be able to say Hanati Lach Makom Lagabi Shimon. Aval Shire Bainis to Kavasi Gabi Shimon. If Levi leaves some average field to Shimon, well then Lo Gavi Mine. Then Reuven's lender is not going to be able to collect from Levi. Dematzi Amar Hanachti Lecha Makom Ligbos Mimenu. I left you some space to collect from Shimon. And so as a result, you can't collect from me. So where is it that we would allow Larry the lender to go either to Shimon or Levi, it's where Levi bought all of the average property. If he buys all of the average property, well, then he's the one who bought the average property, and lenders get to collect from average property. But the lender could also collect from Shimon, because Shimon was the first buyer. And so as a result, he was the one who took possession of it. Now, at the same time, it's an interesting question of what would he be able to take from Shimon? Would he be able to take the best, or would he have to take the worst? I think he would have to take the worst from Shimon, because Shimon could say, I don't, even if Shimon bought the best last, I don't want to benefit from this rule. I don't want to benefit from the rule of whoever buys last, that's who you collect from. And so as a result, I want to benefit from the rule that allows you to collect from what you're supposed to. And what do we say if a person has best and lowest? If they have the superior and inferior, a lender in that situation is only allowed to collect from the inferior. So I believe that would be what the ruling would be. So if that wasn't sufficiently complicated, the good news is that what happens if now, so right now, Victor the victim, Larry the lender, and Wilma the wife are always going to win. The question,
Dawn and Damager.
Dawn the damager, it depends. If Dawn the damager has sold all of his property, well, then he's lucky, and he has no money left, for them to collect. Well, then he may be lucky because there's nothing for them to collect. But if in fact there's stuff for them to collect, well, then he's going to have to pay up also. So that's the story. But the next case is, what happens if Dawn the damager sells all his property, but now he wants to be part of the litigation with respect to the property? Does he still have certain rights to litigate as part of the, because maybe he'll win something extra, he'll have some benefit if he wins the litigation? We're going to see that question, God willing, tomorrow. What? Oh, of course. Well, he should, in Judaism, we don't necessarily have lawyers, but we do have people that can help represent somebody. In general, we try to have people represent themselves because we feel that that's the most honest situation. But we do have sometimes people who are allowed to help with making of claims. So I wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom. Hold on just a second. We're going to stop the sharing. We'll stop the recording. And I wish everybody a fabulous Shabbos and look forward to continuing our learning next week.